Have you ever wondered what happens when you point, say, a computational magnifying glass at an ancient sacred text? Well, today we're diving into a systematic framework that claims to do exactly that, to find hidden numerical patterns inside the Quran.
It's a pretty mind-bending question, isn't it? The idea that we can take the logic of computer code and apply it to a text that's thousands of years old, maybe even see it in a totally new light. That's the big question we're going to unpack in this explainer.
So, to get our heads around that, we first need to just appreciate the whole idea behind it all, using these powerful modern tools to look at ancient texts.
I just love this analogy from the source material because it really hits the nail on the head. It's not about changing the text at all. It's about giving us a new, incredibly powerful lens to examine its structure, its very composition, in ways that were, just impossible before.
Okay, so from that big, broad idea of a magnifying glass, let's zoom in on the specific tool we're looking at today. It's called the Mathani framework, and it's a very structured method for this exact kind of analysis.
So what in the world is Mathani? Well, the name itself actually comes from the Quran, and it means oft repeated. The whole idea behind this framework is that repetition isn't just random, that it's actually a deliberate, fundamental principle, almost like a reflection of divine harmony woven right into the text.
So how does this Mathani idea actually show up? Well, the framework says it appears in a few key ways. First, you've got numerical patterns, which it calls pola. Then, of course, there's the repetition of themes and big ideas. It also hunts for symbolic connections between concepts. And the thinking is that all of this together points to a kind of overarching divine order.
Okay, so that's the what. But what about the how, right? How does the framework actually go about finding these patterns? Let's walk through the 5-step process it lays out. Here it is, the framework's 5-step roadmap. It starts with a text, moves into numbers, then into symbols, and finally, it explores and visualizes everything. Now, to make this real, we're going to follow one single example all the way through the process, an analysis of something called Pola 237 from a specific verse in the Quran.
Now, what's really interesting is where this all starts. It's not with numbers. It actually begins with the text itself. Step 1 is all about classical scholarship, using traditional interpretation to really understand the core themes of the verse, which in this case happen to be about pilgrimage and atonement.
Okay, now we get to the numbers. Once that textual context is set, the framework moves on to step 2, a deep dive into the numerical properties of our target pattern, our pola, which for this example is 237.
So here it is, 237. By itself, it's just a number. But the next step in this framework is to break it down and see what it's made of mathematically.
So this is where the number gets deconstructed, almost like looking at its mathematical DNA. You can see here the analysis finds its factors, it calculates the sum of its digits, and it even flags any factors, in this case the number 3, that match a list of ritually significant numbers. This is the raw data that the framework kicks out.
The framework also uses really simple visuals, like this bar chart. The whole point is just to make these numerical parts easier to see at a glance before we move on to the next step, which is a bit more interpretive. And now for step 3. And honestly, this is the most significant leap in the whole process. This is where the framework tries to build a bridge from those objective numbers over to symbolic meaning, by mapping them to deeper spiritual concepts.
And here's what that mapping looks like. According to the framework's own interpretive model, the number 237 gets connected to al-Wahid, which means the unique. And then its factors, 79 and 3, are likewise mapped to other divine attributes from the Asma'ul Husna, the 99 names of God. This is how the system tries to link its number crunching back to a spiritual context.
The last 2 steps really just bring it all home. Step 4, mathematical exploration, is where they formally note things like 237 being the product of 2 prime numbers. And step 5, visualization, is all about using charts and diagrams, like that bar chart we saw, to make all these proposed connections as clear as possible.
Okay, so we've walked through the whole process. We saw the analysis of POA 237. But what's the big takeaway here? What does all this ultimately offer?
And this is an absolutely critical distinction. According to the people who use this framework, the goal isn't to prove some secret code exists. They say it's more of a tool, a way to just objectively map out the numerical landscape of the text. What those patterns might mean? Well, that's left up to the person doing the analysis.
So at the end of the day, what this framework offers is a new kind of structural lens. The goal is to reveal a text's unique numerical fingerprint, giving us a data-driven perspective that can exist right alongside the more traditional, literary, or theological ways of studying it.
And that leaves us with a really fascinating final thought, doesn't it? If this kind of computational analysis can pull out such intricate numerical structures in one ancient text, it really makes you wonder, what other patterns, what other layers of complexity might just be sitting there waiting to be discovered in our most treasured historical documents?